From the centre of London, in the shadow of the Palace of Westminster, just a few streets from Buckingham Palace, and with the bells of Westminster Abbey pealing, the gun carriage bearing the coffin of the late Queen Elizabeth II made its way slowly from the palace to Westminster Hall. The Queen's coffin was draped in the Royal Standard, which is a flag representing the sovereign and the United Kingdom. On top of it, the imperial state crown was placed on a velvet cushion. King Charles III led the royal family, marching behind the gun carriage. The late Queen's coffin now lies in state, and members of the public have been filing past to pay their respects. Among them are many from Africa, the Caribbean, and the Commonwealth, where ties to the monarchy run deep. But with the Queen's death is also coming a rethink in many of those countries about the role of the monarchy. And as the debate gets louder, so too have calls in places like Jamaica for the British monarch to be removed as their head of state, especially after Barbados recently became a republic. So is this Queen's death likely to accelerate that process of constitutional reform? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the Jamaican poet, author, playwright, and journalist Lindsay Barrett. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming in.
Okay, Charles.
What does this day and this period of the Queen's death mean to you as a Jamaican who has fought hard to break the shackles of colonialism and the legacy of slavery?
Well, let me say that it's a generational thing, Charles. At the time that Jamaica became independent in 1962, although there was a very strong Republican movement among the some younger people, the population, the demographics of Jamaica was such that it was adjudged that a large proportion, more than half the Jamaican population, did not mind having the British monarch remain as head of state. And that has lasted, strangely enough, although Jamaica is well known as a very progressive country. The fact of keeping a governor general who represented the monarch was, has lasted all these years. I remember when the Queen first came to Jamaica. She came to Jamaica shortly after she became Queen, and she was very well received. And members of the royal family have always holidayed in Jamaica and are very well received. But the fact is that a large part of the older generation and a large part of the middle class really like the idea of saying that the head of state is the monarch. As a result, Jamaican politicians and Jamaican leaders all become members of the Privy Council in Britain. And they consider that...
They like it.
They like it as, it's an elite thing. But over the years, there has been a movement, a gradual movement, for us to be more independent. And what has influenced it a lot in recent times is a movement for reparations and recognition of what slavery did to our psyche.
Yes, I'm going to come to that in a minute, and I'm glad you brought that up. But I just want to establish that beyond the institution of the monarchy, the Queen herself as an individual is remembered very fondly across the Commonwealth, the Caribbean and Africa, as someone who treated everyone with respect and equality, which sent a very powerful signal that they were regarded well from the very top of the British establishment.
That's why I mentioned the fact that she came to Jamaica as one of the first overseas colonies that she visited after becoming, I think she came to Jamaica in 1954. I was still in school. I remember standing in the sun for hours waiting for her. And another thing is, observing. Jamaica was one of the first of the small Caribbean countries that took a very public stand on the anti-apartheid movement. And we all respected the fact that she never visited South Africa as a monarch.
Yeah.
She refused to visit South Africa.
In fact, the last time she visited was the year before apartheid began.
Yes.
And she never went there
And she
again.
never went there. And it was known that although she never mentioned what she felt politically, it seemed always that she was against the apartheid.
Right. And yet there's been a lot of sentiment over the last few days of people feeling that the royal family itself as an institution represented the British Empire, something many see as abusive with that legacy of slavery and colonialism.
Well, Jamaicans remember the British monarchy as the master force in slavery. And we, as you know about Jamaica, our national heroes are all people like Marcus Garvey and Nana of Kofi.
And of course, Bob Marley and all the rest of them.
You know, so we have been fully aware of that, and that is now playing out as becoming an actual part of Jamaica's psyche. And that is why I'm not surprised that the last time Prince Charles went, Prince now King Charles, went to Jamaica, the young Prime Minister had no hesitation telling him that he was going to support a referendum.
Yeah, I think it was actually Prince William who wasn't it Prince William?
It was Prince William.
Yeah, Prince William who went.
Representing his father.
Who's now the heir to the throne.
Who's now the heir to the throne. But the Prime Minister had no problem telling him.
Absolutely.
That
and coming from the Prime Minister, that has to be taken very seriously.
The Prime Minister, who is from the JLP, the Jamaica Labour Party, which strangely enough, although it's named the Jamaica Labour Party, it was always seen to be a bit of the right-wing party, is now very serious about setting Jamaica up to do a referendum so that the people will decide. And it's quite interesting, Charles, that at this stage of Jamaica's history, Jamaica will be following the country that used to be called Little England, because now
Barbados has taken the lead, hasn't it?
Although Trinidad did it first, but long ago. But interestingly, it's not the issue of republicanism in the Caribbean should not be seen as only a protest movement. It is because the countries in the Caribbean have suddenly begun to realize that they should spend more time dealing with the countries in Africa. And they feel that as Republicans, they will have a greater voice.
Yes, but it's also interesting that, I mean, even the optics, I mean, it looks odd that, you know, among the new titles that King Charles, who's just become king, received on his accession to the throne just a few days ago was King of Jamaica.
Well, it's actually quite funny, but it's also quite tragic, because what has happened is that a large part of the Caribbean, and Jamaica is the largest of the former British island colonies, a large part of the Caribbean is still considered part of the British Empire.
Well, to be honest, it's actually
no longer exists.
Yeah, but it's actually considered part, because you see, it's because of to some extent, the economic dependency, because those islands, their way of making, you know, their money and so on is tourism, and the biggest number of tourists come from the West. So when you go there, it kind of reinforces, and I go to the Caribbean a lot. I mean, that's my favorite holiday place. I go to Jamaica, St. Lucia, all the rest of them. And you tend to find that all the local people are serving and all the sort of the Westerners are, being served. So it kind of reinforces that stereotypes. But the polls are now suggesting that more than 50% of Jamaicans support the idea of the country becoming a republic. Yeah, it could be 60 now. Do you think the Queen's death has accelerated that process of constitutional reform?
Well, it probably,
or is likely to accelerate
it probably will to some extent,
right.
But the movement has been so strong in recent years that whether the Queen died or not,
yes, it still would have continued. Yeah,
and what is very important is to realize that Jamaica has developed a brand image, and suddenly the country realizes that it can stand on its own. And another important factor is a number of Jamaicans who feel more Jamaican than British say, why is our head of state representing Britain? Although most of our heads of state, or governors general as they call them, are Jamaican born.
Yes, absolutely.
But they stand there and say they're head of state on behalf of the British. And it will not actually cut our ties with the British.
No, absolutely not.
That's
of course.
Thing.
I mean, Nigeria used to be a constitutional monarchy until 1963, when it became a republic. It's very interesting that African countries are all republics, and the Caribbean countries are. Many of them are still
I think
holding on to the apron.
It's overdue. It is a timely thing. And it should not be seen as a reaction to the death of...
Yeah, but also I think that the level of awareness within Jamaica, the Caribbean, is really obviously rising. I mean, you could actually make the same argument about Nigeria, for example, the level of awareness that is suddenly happening as the country goes into elections.
Yes.
But this time it's about its own sort of leaders. Whereas in Jamaica, it's more that of looking at, the question appears to be, the question facing Jamaicans seems to be whether they want a monarch who is not, first of all, prepared to apologize or atone, who is not prepared to express and demonstrate regret, responsibility, and perhaps more importantly, reparatory justice.
Well, that is a very important issue that you've brought up, because there is a movement headed largely by the academic community, and the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies has been very strong on it, to say that in education and in development, we need the sign of reparatory influence, and that it hasn't been shown. But I think that this will gain strength in a republic much more than in a whatever, I don't know, what is it called, a dependency.
Well, it is a constitutional monarchy, and the constitution basically makes the Queen, whoever is the king now, the head of state. And yet, in spite of this movement that you're talking about, Lindsay, movement away from the monarchy, ties to the monarchy in Jamaica run deep, don't they? It's ingrained in the island's politics, its history, its institutions, and of course its constitution.
Let me tell you, when I was growing up, there was an office called the Custos. Jamaica is divided into 14 parishes and 3 counties. And the Custos was like the state governor here of the state. The Custos represented the Queen at the grassroots community.
Wow.
And it didn't represent, and the governor represented the Queen, and the Custos was like the governor of the county. And when Jamaica became independent, although that was removed, they now said that the Governor General represents the Queen. So we all grew up believing that the head of the administration represented the Queen.
It's amazing, isn't it? Looking into your eyes, I can see them sort of blazing with passion. I mean, do you miss Jamaica quite a bit?
I miss Jamaica a lot, but I miss Jamaica only because it is so hard to get there. I would like to be able to travel between Jamaica and Nigeria regularly, and I hope that very soon we'll do that.
Because I mean,
especially when we are two republics.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your High Commissioner, the Jamaican High Commissioner to Nigeria, has been doing a lot of positive work to try and strengthen relations between the two countries. And one of the things he's doing is trying to see if he can effect a direct flight between the two places. But I mean, you've been in Nigeria for 56 years.
56 years.
That's extraordinary, really.
Well, I came and stayed because I came to Nigeria at the time of the Civil War, and I got involved. I wish I hadn't.
Well, that's not very nice, Lindsay.
No, well, why I wish I hadn't, because it was a war time and I didn't know enough about the country.
Okay, I see what you mean.
I've said it to people that had I been in Nigeria for 5 years
prior to the war,
I would not have taken the stand I took.
Right.
Well, that's
yeah, but I mean, when was the last time you went back to Jamaica?
Oh, 1996 was
My
the only time I went to Jamaica.
You mean since for the entire time you'd been here?
I've never been back.
But why is that?
Because I don't have the money to go, it's difficult and so on, and because I have so much doing here.
Yeah.
In fact, some people got in touch with me recently. They want to make me a fellow of somewhere in Nigeria.
Well, to be honest with you, and I think Nigeria is the better for the fact that you've been here for that length of time. Because I think you've done such a remarkable job journalistically, as an author, in terms of opening the eyes of so many people in many parts of this country, particularly people in the the Niger Delta area and all the rest of them. And I don't think the history of this country would be complete if your name isn't there. But let's return to the focus of our discussion. Does it now seem like a referendum on the issue of the monarchy is inevitable in Jamaica?
It seems inevitable, especially since the present Prime Minister, who is a very young man.
That Holness.
Yes, he has said that he supports the referendum, and his body language seems to show that he supports.
He comes across that way. Yeah.
So I think it's inevitable.
Well, we're also seeing almost like a wave, because Jamaica tends to set the pace in the Caribbean, even though Barbados was kind of leading the way this time, and as you mentioned, Trinidad before that. But I mean, we're hearing places like Antigua and Barbuda and all the rest of them. Yes. Gaston Brown, who's the Prime Minister, talking about the same kinds of things. But let's move away slightly from the Caribbean. We've got like a couple of minutes left. You, of course, have been living, as you said, in Africa for many decades now, in Nigeria. What's your sense of how African leaders feel about how the death of the Queen and the arrival of a new king might change the dynamic, particularly among those that are Commonwealth nations?
Well, I think mainly most Commonwealth nations recognize the king as the one who would take over from his mother, as not only monarch, but as head of the Commonwealth. And so I think they're waiting because there is a feeling that maybe there could be a new type of dialogue with a new type of king. And I think most people are hoping that we'll have a dialogue that is more understanding. And I think most African leaders are expecting that and are hoping to enter dialogue with the king. That doesn't mean they are going to make him their head of state, But there is so much to discuss, especially in the post-colonial world. We need to discuss a lot about reparations and other things. And I think King Charles will probably be more willing to listen.
Very interesting. Lindsay, I want to thank you very much indeed for the time that you've given us today. I mean, it's always brilliant talking with you. And Lindsay Barrett is the Jamaican poet, author, playwright, and journalist. Thank you ever so much.